Upon finishing Death Note late last night, I'm sure a decent amount of people want to hear what I think of it. Truthfully, it was watchable. It wasn't the worst live-action adaptation I've seen, and the fact that it exceeded my extremely low expectations actually shocked me. Before watching the movie, I decided to check out the original creators' opinions, Tsugumi Ohba and Takeshi Obata. They actually loved this adaptation, and while I disagree with that sentiment, they created this story. If they love it, much like Mamoru Oshii loving the pick of Scarlett Johansson for Motoko Kusanagi, I guess in the end that's what matters. While the film did have a ton of faults, I don't necessarily think this is an awful way to introduce someone to Death Note, as long as they know the characters are improved upon, except maybe Misa Amane. Let's be real here for a minute. In the anime, Misa was Light's lapdog. In the Netflix movie, for most of it at least, the roles were basically switched. Light had his character shine near the end of the movie, but for most of it Misa was our girl. Now mind you, not that she was done particularly well. I think the anime Misa has more charm, but Netflix Misa has a bit more strength as a person. The highlights of the movie were definitely William Dafoe's role as Ryuk and Keith Stanfield as L. Hold up, I'll explain. I loved every minute Dafoe was on screen. He pulled off the role of Ryuk amazingly. If there's any reason you watch the movie, it at least has to be for his role. Even if you dread every other moment of it, I wouldn't mind this guy as everyone's vision of Ryuk. As for Stanfield, in general, I think L is a difficult character to pull off in live action. I think even some of the Japanese actors in the original live actions looked a little awkward playing him. He's just one of those characters that I don't really think translate well into real life. And I have a list of those kinds of characters. Please never make a Monogatari live action featuring Ogi Oshino. Please. You see, L was a character that I had many worries about. And not because he was portrayed by a black guy. That didn't cross my mind at all. Actually, what concerned me the most was the scene in the trailer with L speaking to a crowd of people. It seemed kind of out of character for him, but it seems he waited to reveal himself as a tactic against Light, which is already kind of like the L we know. Sure, there were some changes to his character. He was a little more expressive than any of us remember, but it really reminded us that the character we should be rooting for is L. When L started losing things around him, I genuinely felt bad for him. Let me also say that his entry into the film was really surprising. If anyone calls this film whitewashed, I actually feel bad for you. L, portrayed by a black man, is introduced in a scene with a ton of Asian actors speaking in Japanese, set in a Japanese nightclub. Talking about Japan, I was skeptical about Light calling himself Kira this time around, how they would go about doing it, and so on. But the fact they worked Kira's Japanese presence into the movie worked extremely well. They tried their damnedest to stay true to what Kira meant. Now unfortunately, that doesn't mean that shined through Nat Wolff's portrayal of Light very well. His acting was weak, and as I mentioned before, his role with Misa is basically switched around. She controls most of what's going on. Well, and Ryuk. Which makes sense. Light lost a lot of the charm we knew him for. He wasn't as crafty and strategic as the Light we remember, but in the end, that part of him shined. So maybe if they decide to make another movie, we'll get to see that side of Light that we want to see. Let me also say, I'm extremely happy they kept his dad alive. The few things that bugged me the most were more so on the directorial side of things. There were a couple bad cuts here and there, such as a few of the murders. One in particular was extremely confusing that I had to rewind for to make sure I saw it right. You might know the one I'm talking about. In the restaurant, with the knife. Yeah, that one. The other things that bothered me were the overuse of vocal soundtrack. They could have put some generic horror music in there and it probably would have worked better in some scenes. Sometimes the songs worked, other times they really just could have been skipped. And in some scenes it was just plain distracting. Then there was the ending. Over the course of the film, I started to actually hate Light and Misa. I mean, if they were going for the same idea that the anime went for, I guess they succeeded in that part. After L got deeply involved with the case, I really started to root for him and actually spoke to the people I was watching the movie with. Look, at this point, I don't care if they change the ending. I want to see L win this. Unfortunately, the ending is too open. L is about to write Light's name in the Death Note, and his eyes grow wide. Did Ryuk take care of him? Did something shock him? Unfortunately, we're unsure, but it opens the movie up for a sequel, which I'm torn on. On one end, I actually want to see this L win, and I'll be pretty mad if he actually dies. On the other side, I'm glad they didn't condense the whole story into an hour and 40 minutes. Condensing the story was something that was bound to happen anyway, and in some parts it still kind of feels rushed, like Light and Misa's relationship seems like it happened overnight. In the anime, I recall him thinking his options over once Misa was in his room and decided to go out with her, solely to take advantage of her. That isn't present at all in this movie. Misa, however, does manipulate Light on multiple occasions, but I'm unsure if that was her intention from the start or not. Also, why the fuck is Light reading the Death Note in the gym and arguing with Misa in the hallways about the Death Note? Couldn't someone, like, notice them? Like I said, this movie has glaring issues, but it's not unwatchable. Do I recommend it to even the slightest Death Note fans? Not really. It's a popcorn film at best, but I really stand by Defoe being one of the best portrayals of Ryuk there is, so if there's any reason you watch the movie, it needs to be for him. The creators of the Netflix movie didn't butcher Death Note terribly, and there's nothing I feel salty about regarding the movie. After all, it exceeded my already low expectations, and I feel it's a step in the right direction for American anime live-action adaptations. It feels different than the original, but it stays true to the original in some aspects, and it offers a totally new experience. And for it being a straight-to-Netflix movie, some people may pick this up and become interested in the real Death Note we've all come to love, and realize that the characters in the anime or the manga are much more fleshed out. But I don't think this movie will at all ruin the perception of any of the characters for someone interested in the anime, especially with how the ending worked. The true colors of every character really showed by the end. Most of the movie's big problems come down to a rushed story and an oversaturated soundtrack. With that said, I'd give it a strong 5 out of 10, maybe a weak 6 out of 10. I also like how they included a Hand of Kira type character, to take a similar road to Teru Mikami. Unfortunately, they do away with him after his job is done. But I'm glad that they added little things here and there that somebody that's a fan of the anime or the manga could turn around and say, "Oh, I get what they're trying to reference."